Okay, and so continuing with learning how to build that extended response. So today, lesson or unit 3, lesson 4, plan extended response. And this is going to feel familiar from lesson 3 that we did. It's sort of expounding on that idea of once you pick the points you're going to talk about, organizing them into your paragraph, sort of from most important to least important. We're going to discuss things like that today. So by the time we complete our lesson here, we'll be able to prepare an outline or graphic organizer. That's going to be a big part of what we do today. Discuss points of comparison, which we've done a lot already, and sequence the order of points in your response. So that's really a main idea here is what do we consider as being the most important? And do we want to start with that, or do we want to go from least important to most important? And we're going to kind of work through the same idea together, just so you understand how it's done. There's several different ways you can do it, but we'll kind of work on one together, so at least you get one example. And then there's going to be some other templates like we saw in the previous classes that you can use if you want to experiment. If you find something that's a little better for you, by all means, use it, as long as it sort of falls in that guideline of where we are, or as far as what they suggest that you use. So let's listen to our audio.
Before you draft your extended response, choose an organizational structure and prepare an informal outline or graphic organizer with all of your points. For a comparison and contrast essay, you can use one of two possible organizational structures, subject by subject or point by point. When you organize your extended response according to subject, discuss all points of comparison relating to one subject, and then do the same for the second subject. When you organize according to points, discuss both subjects with regard to one point before moving to the next point. In both cases, decide whether you want to sequence the order of points from most important to least important, or vice versa.
There you go. So point by point or subject by subject. And we'll get a little more explanation here as to what they mean here. So subject by subject, right? It looks pretty similar, but you state and explain the first point of comparison, and then provide an example of this point from the first passage. So, what we've been dealing with here are, fairly short passages. And so, you're going to do that over and over again. So same thing, state and explain the second point of comparison, provide an example of this point from the same passage, state and explain the third point of comparison, provide an example of this point from the same passage, okay? Point by point. So you state and explain the first point of comparison, and then provide an example of this point from each passage. State and explain the second point of comparison, and then provide an example of this point from each passage. State and explain the third point, and then provide an example from each passage. So what they have here is a subject by subject, right? For a subject by subject comparison, you will need to repeat the structure for the second passage. Use this organizational structure with short essays or with essays on complex, less familiar topics. And then for point by point, use the point by point organizational structure with longer essays or with essays that focus on topics already familiar to you. So, but basically what they're saying here is we'll work with subject by subject, right? Because we're writing a short essay. And so it's saying that you repeat that for your second, right? So what they have here, when it says subject by subject, state and explain the first point of comparison, provide an example of this point from the first passage, right? So then you go through with, I think we're dealing with Clement and Jones or Cliff and Jones, whichever ones was talking about online teaching. We're going to be looking at those again today. So you would go through with the one passage, right? And you would work through those, and then you go back and you do the same thing with the second passage, with the second author. That might be a better way to explain it. So taking a look then, moving right on over to the quiz. And again, when we get into this, it'll feel a little familiar, and it'll like make a lot more sense as we go along. Let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and reread it just because it's been like 4 days now since we've had class. We had an extra day off. So just to refamiliarize ourselves with these passages, I'll go ahead and get through it real quick here. But again, ad nauseum, you'll be able to, you'll start dreaming about these, I think, eventually. We've been talking about them so much. So I'll just chalk up my first and only venture to experience and make my way back to the traditional classroom. Among the reasons why are these. A virtual community is the ultimate contradiction in terms, like saying one is fresh from the tennis court, while some people find anonymity enabling and are able to bond with their online group and engage in true confessions. I find it very difficult to communicate with people for whom I have no face, no body language, no in-the-moment exchange. The quality of education is compromised in online learning. In online teaching, I was only able to introduce students to a limited amount of material outside the textbook readings. It is simply impossible to replicate a lecture online, nor can I adequately help them develop better writing and critical thinking skills or to foster original ideas because there simply wasn't enough time or a proper way to discuss ideas. Show me the money. I devoted at least 3 times as many hours and triple the energy to online teaching than was necessary for traditional courses, but I received no additional pay for that effort. Try to talk me down. Tell me I didn't give it enough time. Call me old-fashioned and out of date. Just don't call me to teach online. And as we know very well at this point, Elaine Cliff. I'll never teach online again. And then our second one of the biggest appeals of online education is the flexibility that the standard classroom cannot match. Although there are still deadlines, students may complete assignments at preferred times. A student who works during the evening may complete assignments during the day. Another student may complete the same assignments during the evening. In addition, because students access virtual classrooms electronically, they may attend classes in other states or countries without leaving home and driving to a specific location. Online programs also may offer more course choices than a traditional campus. Another appeal of online education is self-management. Students can choose their own certificate or degree programs, plan the pace at which they want to complete these programs, and access course materials at any time. Rebecca, an online student, recalls, when I missed a class, I missed the notes. Now I'm able to access the professor's course notes whenever I need them. Lastly, online education offers exciting options for students with different learning styles. In place of the traditional classroom lecture, many courses feature multimedia elements. These may range from video and audio clips to live chats and discussion forums. Today, statistics show that about 32% of college students take at least one online class. It's clear that technology is revolutionizing education and providing new and exciting opportunities for students such as Jalen Rollins from Carl Jones, Benefits of Online Education. So I am more of I know it says for point by point, it's better for longer essays. However, I think that it is easier to organize with point by point than it is subject by subject, because you discuss both, you discuss them before moving on and coming back to it. So in the subject by subject, you do each passage subject by subject, right? So you do the first passage, each state and explain your point of comparison, and then you have to do it again. Point by point, you state and explain the first point of comparison, and then you provide an example of this point from each. So that way, I think it's easier to, since you're doing what you could shoot for is about a 5-paragraph essay, right? You're going to have an introduction. Each paragraph then allows you to explore each comparison. So you have state and explain your first point of comparison, and then for the body of your paragraph, you explain, right? You provide an example of the point from each passage. So you can start with Cliff, and then then you go to Jones. And then for your second paragraph, you state and explain the second point of comparison, right? And then you within the body of that paragraph, same thing, you provide an example from each one, and then do that again. It gets a little jumbled, I believe, when you do a subject by subject, because you're having to come back to do that again with the second passage. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense? Okay. So what it says here for the test taking tip, for both structures, each point and its accompanying examples will serve as one or two body paragraphs. I'm sorry, was it for both structures, each point and its accompanying examples will serve as one or two body paragraphs in the actual extended response. Keep this information in mind as you plan the outline for your response, right? So to me, it just rounds up getting a little muddled with the subject by subject. Point by point, you get through the point and you get to move on, and you don't have to come back to it. And basically what they're saying here is that with the response you're writing, it will wind up being the same amount of text, right? You're not writing anymore using subject by subject or point by point. It's just how you want to organize it. So I think today we'll do the point by point. And again, I'll have like all of our, text boxes and things like our images here, like subject by subject, point by point. I will put those on Google Classroom. So if you want to practice or explore that, you're going to have that available. The other thing, let's say you take this at a test site. The GED test sites are open. They'll give you like a dry erase board, like a little one, like a tablet, that you can take notes on. So as you go, you can make an outline that way. I think I want to follow up as far as taking that at home, what you are allowed, because there will be sort of like a proctor that checks to see. They want to make sure. One thing that we talked about on Friday that Tracy and Rachel want you to know is that if you need to have sort of a secure place where you're not interrupted, and they don't want like people, around you or anything. So there will be somebody there sort of to check you on camera to make sure that you're sort of in a secure place where you don't have, disruptions or interactions with other people while you're taking the test. Okay. So our first little question here, Grace, you want to read question 1 there and answer it for us?
Okay. In a point-by-point structure that should follow an example about the use of tone in the cleft passage. Hey, what should follow an example about the use of tone in the cleft passage? A, an example of the use of point of view in the cleft passage. B, an explanation of what tone is. C, the introduction of another point. And D, an example of the use of tone in the Jones passage. A.
So it's D. So after, right, in the point by point, right, which is, over here, you give your whole, I'm talking about their point of view or their claim, right, their argument. So you would start with, some type of introductory sentence or something about that. And then you would go to Cliff, right? So you would use Cliff's argument as far as her experience teaching online and yada, yada, yada. And then you would go right into Jones in that same paragraph, right? Right after you make your example of Cliff, you would use a little transitional statement. You might, in contrast, right? In contrast, comma, Jones, for example, Jones asserts that online education is flexible and means for students to learn, however you're going to word it, right? And then you would carry on and complete the paragraph with Jones's evidence from Jones. Okay, so that's where we're leading into, and we'll look here at the two charts to get a better example. So study the chart, choose an organizational structure for your extended response, indicate your choice in the space provided. You can, if you guys have a way to take notes outside of what I have here, some of this is asking follow along on a sheet of paper to complete the chart. We're going to have the little text boxes that we used before, I believe. Yeah, so we'll be working and writing some as well, but feel free to take notes also. So it says on a separate sheet of paper, complete the appropriate chart to plan your response. Place individual ideas in order of importance from most important to least important. You may refer to the evidence chart in lesson 3 as needed. You will enter the information from your chart by filling out the answer boxes in this lesson. So what they're talking about there from lesson 3, I have that on Google Classroom too, if you need to refer back to that. So looking here, what they have for subject by subject, right? So what's the first point of comparison? What explanation will this point require, right? So they want you to, have this sort of as an outline, and then which example from Cliff's passage supports this point, right? And you continue to do that for each point in Cliff's passages or in the first writing for the first author. And then you do the same again, restating the first point of comparison or contrast. Same thing, right? You go to Jones. Point by point, though, little less muddled, if you ask me, right? So what is the first point of comparison or contrast? What explanation will this point require? And then you go to the example, right? Which example from Cliff's passage supports this point? Which example from the Jones passage supports this point? And then you move on right to the second one. So what they mean by explanation there. So we'll get into that a little bit when we talk about each point we're going to use. I've sort of already selected the points with some of the guidelines they use just for ease of use. And stuff that we're familiar with these two passages already, some of which we've already worked with. So that'll kind of help move us along and give us a good idea here. So it's asking us, please indicate if you will be organizing your response subject by subject or point by point. It's all it's asking here. We're going to go ahead and do point by point. So for this response, and you can type any, I'll type this in the chat too. I will use a point by point structure. Okay. Straightforward. So just looking again at that, right? So point by point, we're going to pick a point of comparison, which we did already in the last lesson, right? And then we go through, and this is very similar to what we did. For each point, we're going to add evidence as we go along. So now for question 2, right? It's asking, what is the first point of comparison or contrast? So I was looking at what we did in the previous lessons, and also with what we chose for those, and what the lesson actually suggests. So there's a lot of similarities there. So for the first one, what we're going to do for the first point of comparison or contrast is the main claim. And I'll say / point of view. Okay. And I believe that was one we chose earlier, right? When we were looking at claims and then selecting the point of view and then selecting the evidence behind it from last week. So copy, paste there, make it easy for you guys. And as they're saying, right, this is, you would, as you're taking notes, if you're reading this for your exam, you might chart or sort of note that as you go. But that's what it's asking you to do, right? Looking at this chart, first thing we've done, right? What is the first point of comparison or contrast? That's going to be their points of view. So, does that need an explanation? Some of these may need more explanation than others. So that, might be easier. And then you might just get to go right into their examples, right into the evidence that you're going to give. So the main claim or point of view for our first point, okay? And then what explanation will point one require? So you would want to just put that these, we'll say something like these two authors have chosen different, let's say, I have a much better way to do this. And we'll use the names here. So Clift argues against the idea of online education, while Jones argues for online education. Right? So that's our explanation. When we're talking about point of view, one has the point of view that they favor it, one takes the point of view that they dislike it. Right? I hope everybody following along so far. This should, like I said, kind of feel familiar. We've been working with these passages for so long now, and we sort of understand, the different points that we're going to make. So this would basically encompass our first paragraph if we were doing just like a 5-paragraph sort of small essay. I also want to tell you, later on in the week, I'm supposed to be talking to Tracy Johnson again. She has some insight into what is going to be required, what exactly they look for in the written response. And I made an assumption earlier and I got it confirmed. She didn't get all the points to me yet. That's what I'm going to talk to her later. But as I mentioned, it does not matter which passage you choose to argue for, right? It doesn't matter. They just want to see, that you're able to flesh out your ideas and, give the main points and everything. So you could go, if we were talking about Clift and Jones for your writing response, you could choose Clift or you could choose Jones. You're not getting deducted points. They're not expecting you to take one over the other. It's up to you to decide which one you discuss or which one you support, right? So 4, right? How does point of view make up the argument, right? So 5, which example from the Clift passage supports point 1? So we can say she claims, we'll say Clift claims that online teaching is not worthwhile. Okay. So now you see how we're stepping down. If you're kind of visualizing an outline, right? We start with the main claim point of view. Then we give a little bit of explanation as to what those arguments are. And now we're getting into more distinct evidence. So she's claiming that, teaching online is not worthwhile. And you would, continue to flesh this out, right? This is still sort of building and planning our response. So copy there, paste there. Okay, Cliff claims that online teaching is not worthwhile. And then for Jones, same thing. So we can say for Jones, Jones' point of view is that online learning offers advantages. Okay. And that basically is their point of view, right? We've explained from the overall idea that one dislikes online learning, one is in favor of online learning, and we've given a reason for that, right? Now, of course, as we go along and we were building out our paragraphs, we're going to get a little more involved in why that is. We would give additional evidence there. But that would be the next segment of an outline, right? That would be the next step over in your outline. So Jones's point of view is that online learning offers advantages. Okay. Now, what would follow on with that would be the reasons, right? So that will be our next point of comparison. So we started with their claims, their arguments. Now let's go to the reasons. So what is your second point of comparison or contrast? That would be the reasons presented by the authors. Let's say reasons. All right, so then we step down again under those reasons. So what explanation will point to require? You're basically, this is what I'm talking about. You're not going to have to give a lot of explanation. It's reasons. So you could put something like the evidence and anecdotes both authors use. Okay, well, maybe not evidence. How about oh yeah, no, that does work. So the no, examples, we'll say the examples both authors use to support their well, I think that support only has 2 P's, not 3. Support their claims. Okay. Copy here. Paste here. Okay. And that would be sort of how you start your second paragraph. Your explanation, you would have an introductory statement there. In both passages, the authors offer examples in support of their claims. And you probably see what's coming here. So which example from Cliff's passage supports point 2? So what example could we use when it comes to reasons given? I'm going to throw this out to you guys now. What does Cliff use for her reasons? Anybody gonna give it a shot? I'll put y'all to sleep today. I put everybody to sleep today. Okay, Christiana, what you?
Well, are you talking about his reason for not teaching online?
Yeah, from Clift. Yeah, what was one of the major reasons there that they don't like it?
Difficult to interrupt.
Okay, there you go. So that's perfect, right? So for Clift, one of the reasons was anonymity, you know, and stuff like that. So let's just go back and we'll take a quick look here at the passage. So, you know, she says,
difficult to communicate with people who have no face.
Very good. Yeah, hard to communicate with people. So, we can put that, hard to communicate with faceless people, or how she put it. You're going to be using your own words. You're going to be paraphrasing some. You know, you don't want to quote a whole lot from the passages. You want to use your own words. So we'll say Clift. Here we go. Clift states that it is hard to communicate with, we'll say anonymous, right? Because she uses anonymity with anonymous people online. Okay. I'll copy and paste that. And of course, there was other ones, right? She talks about her the quality of materials. She couldn't introduce a wealth of material in those online classes. And then she mentions her pay as well, like she was working a lot compared to the pay she was getting. She wasn't getting paid extra. So you could bring that up as well. So there's some reasons for you. In this case, we only need one good one before we move on. And then 10, okay, so which example from the Jones passage supports point 2? What would you like to use for Jones's reason?
Flexibility.
Flexibility, good one. So yeah, Jones discusses flexibility. Yeah, spell that right. Flexibility. Yeah, that's all we need. Okay. So for the next one, I think we're starting the next one here. We're going to go with, let's see, so Jones discusses flexibility for number 10. And then third point of comparison and contrast, we'll go with tone. So that's all we need, right? Tone for number 11. Copy, paste. Okay. And you see here, whether you're doing subject by subject or point by point, you know, you're basically your tactics for getting there are very similar. You still have to do, you know, a point, you know, like 3 points. You'll need one from each, you know, passage. It's just a matter of how you'll eventually organize it into the writing. So the exercise, right, is the same. So if we were doing this by subject, same idea. It's just how it's going to be organized within the writing itself will be different. So tone for number 11. And then it says, what kind of explanation does point 3 require? So for tone, we're discussing we'll say their word choice and writing style helps persuade the reader. That's the idea behind style and tone. So that would be something, your third paragraph. You might start with something like, finally, each author, takes on a different tone with particular word choice and style of writing to help persuade their reader, or to persuade the reader. So did I copy that? And that would be your introductory sentence. Okay. And so Cliff, right? We know what kind of tone does Cliff take with her passage? It's basically negative, right? So we'll just say Cliff uses a use a negative tone to dissuade readers from online. And paste. Okay. So there we go for that. And then 14, we know, right? Jones does the opposite. So we'll say, Jones uses an optimistic tone in explaining benefits of online learning for online education. Okay. And as I mentioned, it's up to you. I'm just using this as a baseline, so we all are sort of on the same page as far as how it's going to work through your own response. If you go with something else, that's fine, as long as you have evidence and you can make that point for each one. So there's other ones that we could discuss. We talked about sort of like for the other passage, right? We talked about counterclaims. So this one not so much, where there's a counterclaim. Jones doesn't use a counterclaim where Cliff does. So you might want to avoid that one. But there's all those other ones that was in that web that you could discuss. That's fair game. So basically, just before we submit, that was the last one. You see, right, how that works. So whether it was point by point or subject by subject, you can build your outline the same way, right? You just state and explain the first point of comparison, and then you do explanation. You give an example for the point from each passage for point by point. You do one passage in subject by subject, and then you go to the next one. So how does everybody feel about that? Everybody kind of on the same page here? Everybody understand how to build those out? And like I said, I will put these templates, like how you should manage that on Google Classroom, so you can reference those as well. Okay, so we can go ahead and submit. Excuse me. Okay, and now we go to the workbook, where it's going to be fairly similar. So in the same way that the human body is supported by a skeleton, an essay is built around a structural outline. It's a great way to think about it, right? You build a framework, just like a house has a frame, just like buildings have, you know, a steel frame and things like that. You build your essay around a framework. So in comparison and contrast writing, this outline may take one of two commonly used forms. Like we just talked about, the first is subject by subject. In this form, you address one subject and all related points before moving to the next subject. The second form is point by point. In this form, you address a single point common to both subjects and then move to the next point. With each structure, you must decide how to sequence the points. So this is kind of where we're going next. So that means you may choose to start with the most important point and move to the least important, or do the reverse. When choosing an organizational structure and sequence, think about what would make the most sense and be most convincing to readers. You know, for this assignment, it's just going to be up to you guys, right? For your reading response, as long as you kind of stick to that. So do you want to build to the strongest case, or do you want to lead with your best evidence? And then, you know, fill out with the other 2 points. That is totally up to you. But again, right, so what it's showing here, the sort of the difference between the two, right? So with the subject, you're going to go point 1, evidence, point 2, evidence, point 3, evidence. Okay. And like it says at the bottom, so repeat this organizer for each subject. Use this structure when writing a short essay in a timed situation about topics unfamiliar to your audience. On point by point, so repeat this organizer for each point. Use the structure when writing a long essay in a timed situation, or about topics with which your audience is familiar. So either way, right? The point here and why they're showing you these two is because it's going to be in a timed situation. So I don't know why they say point by point's a longer essay than subject by subject. Again, you know, in this case, they're going to be about the same length. You can maybe explore a little deeper with the point by point because you could add more points, but at the end of the day, it's the same. You're going to use the same number of points. You're going to use the same amount of evidence. It's a time situation either way. And it's just, I guess it's just more comfortable for me to, it just adds to the comparison or the contrast if you can do that sort of in the same paragraph, right? If you can point out one author and then you can go to the next author and do the same thing. So let's start our response here. And so it says, considering your audience. When deciding order of importance, if the audience is opposed to your ideas, present the most convincing point first. If the audience agrees with you, present the most important point last. So of course here, we don't know what your audience is basically a grader. So it's just your choice, right? It's a dealer's choice whether you want to start with your best point or your weakest point, right? So that's just up to you. But, you know, if you're writing above and beyond that, or for other courses or something like that, you may want to consider who your audience is, what you're discussing to go about it that way. So let's see. Let's go to Sasha Gay for our one and only multiple choice. You want to read our question here and answer it?
In a subject by subject structure, which item would follow the first mention of a point about the use of rhetorical strategy? A, an introduction of a second point. B, evidence from Clement and Lang's passage. C, evidence from Clement's passage. And D, explanation of a counter argument. Is it B?
It's C, so evidence from Clement's passage. So subject by subject, right? So item follows the first mention of a point about the use of, so, we're going to talk about their rhetorical strategy, right? The rhetoric they use, their elements of rhetoric that we have, that we've talked about. So right after that, you wouldn't switch to another, you wouldn't switch to the other author. With subject by subject, you would continue with that author until you made all of your points. So that would be C then, right? You would continue with evidence from the Clement passage. It's funny, they start talking about Leung and Clement here for some reason, but they didn't start with the passages.
Here.
What's that?
They didn't include the passages.
Right. Yeah. So we'll just stick with talking about Cleft and Jones. Okay. Since we're already doing that, we've already continue with that. And it doesn't, again, this is all just to strengthen your understanding of how to write the passages anyway. And so what they have here is order of importance. So it's a study diagram. Think about the 3 points of comparison and contrast that you defined in lesson 3. List the points in order from most important to least important in the space provided. So, we're going to build off of what we just did with Cliff and Jones. So thinking about, we use point of view, we use reasons, and we use tone. So I'll throw this to you guys, however you want to do it. Which way do you want to go? What do you want to start with? Now, it's not like one's going to be so obviously strong all the time. So it's also just a matter of, okay, what do I want to start with, right? It's also a matter of what you believe is the strongest to the weakest. So what do you want to start with here? Point of view, reasons, or tone?
Point of view.
Point of view. Okay. So we'll put point of view here. And then I'll kind of make our own little flow chart here. So what would be next? You want to do tone next or reasons next?
Reason.
Okay. Reasons. And then
Tone.
at least tone. We did 3. So point of view, reasons, and tone. Okay. And, that's going to be totally up to you. It's just a matter of, helping get your thoughts organized. So you'll know it's like, okay, I want to do point of view first, and I'm going to do reasons, and then I'm going to do tone. Okay. So, all right. Point of view, reasons, tone. So what's it ask us here? So are we going, I guess I'm going to assume, are we starting with our most important? Do we see point of view as the most important then?
Yes.
Okay, just for the sake of the exercise, we'll say the point of view. And again, right, you could disagree with me. It's no, I'm more just doing this for the lesson and the exercise. So if you put them in a different way or anything else, it's entirely up to you. But just, as we work through the lesson here, and as it's asking us, so this point is most important because. So it's funny. They seem to choose already in the instructions how they want you to do it, right? So they start with most important. So we'll say for point of view, point of view is most important. because of the high contrast. And again, I'm just kind of, making my own point here, of the high contrast between the two authors' claims. Okay. So copy. Now, in other cases, it may be evident, right? So you'd want to lead with, especially like, if the reason you choose one passage over the other is because of the evidence, like this is the most important because one author uses more compelling and logical evidence than the other, right? So you want to point out those big differences. We talked about, things like rhetoric. So that one you might want to lead with, or, anything here, but you want to understand why are you going to use that as your first reason, and why do you believe? Again, it doesn't matter who else, but it's what you want to put in there as far as what the point you're going to make is, or the most important one. So then 2. So this point is second in importance because we chose reasons, right? Reasons are second because it further explains the points of view of the two authors. And that's the other thing too. One may lead into the other. So you can also just, that's something you want to think about as well. How does it flow together? That's another way to sort of flesh those things out. Going from one point to the next, what makes sense? What's logical to put in that order? What makes a better flow, right? The reasons are second because it further explains the points of view of the two authors. Okay. And this point is least important. I don't like least important, as far as what you've picked, again, right? You have more reasons that you could use, or you could have more points that you can use than others. So it's less that it's the least important as it is, it's the third strongest. That's the way you want to think about it, that you're using the 3 strongest points. But we'll say, ooh, the wind's blowing hard out there. Tone is the third strongest point because it offers more contrast between the two authors. Okay. And the other point to make here is that you are building towards supporting one passage over the other. So you also need to thread that into your paragraph. So with the tone, you're not just pointing out that this person's tone is this and this person's tone is that. You want to say, Jones's tone is better than Cliff's because he offers an optimistic, such and such and such. We're going to get into that more. I think what I'm going to do is put up an example for you guys once I talk to Tracy and I find out exactly, get more insight into what is on, what they're looking for. And I'll use like Clifton Jones, and I will put together a passage for you guys so you have a, something to help understand exactly what they should look like. Would that help?
Yes, that would help.
Okay. And I'm going to expose myself as a horrible writer. No. I hope not. But yeah, I think that might help too if we get some examples for you guys. So I'll work on that after we get through this unit and we've completed it, and I will annotate it. I will give you step-by-step directions as far as thought process and everything and how these lessons apply in those. Okay. So did I copy and paste that yet? Yes, I did. Okay, so yeah, tone is the third strongest point because it offers more contrast between the two authors. And then 6, so state whether you list your points in order from most important to least important, or least important to most important. Then explain why you have made this choice. This is kind of arbitrary, but we'll say I started with the most important points, or most important point, because I wanted to build a strong argument for passage X, whichever one, by starting with point of view. Okay. But that's, again, it's up to you which route you go. In this case, like it said, if you don't really know the audience, you don't know which passage they would prefer, and theoretically they don't support one or the other anymore, right? They are looking for your critical thinking. How well did you explain each point, and the evidence that you use. So it's totally up to you as far as whether you lead with the least important and work your way to the most important. That will be less obvious to them. It's much more obvious to you what you're starting with. So here we go again. Now it's asking, so it says study the graphic organizers below. Choose either the subject by subject organizer or the point by point organizer to organize your points. Refer to the points you defined and the evidence you gathered in lesson 3 if needed. If you are unsure about which structure to choose, complete both organizers, then decide which makes the most sense to use on the basis of logic and persuasiveness. Of course, when you're writing during your test, you're not going to be able to do that. So you probably need to go ahead and maybe as you're reading, if you you might want to decide at that point. So right here, it's all lined out for you. So subject by subject, you're going to hit right the first passage. That's the subject is basically passage 1, point 1, evidence, point 2, evidence, point 3, evidence. And then you go to Jones, right, for the second passage, point 1, evidence, same thing. Point by point, though, little simpler because we just start with the points. We're not starting with each passage. So point by point, we're going to go with our, point of view would be our first point, reasons would be our second point, third point would be tone, and then we would expound on that, right? That's what we would discuss within the body of our writing response. Evidence from subject passage 1, evidence from subject passage 2. That's going to take up the majority of each paragraph. You're going to start with an with the introduction, and a small maybe explanation if necessary of, what the point is. And then you would, conclude, you'd wrap it up at the end with another sort of concluding paragraph. So, what's asking here is identify which organizer you will use. If you're unsure, indicate that you will use both. So I'm throwing this sort of to you, since we did point by point. Do you feel comfortable with that? Would anybody rather use subject by subject? What's your individual preference here? Would somebody feel more comfortable with subject by subject? I could try to do, as an example for you guys to do both. So you see how those work. Would you want me to do that?
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, and again, like what I'm saying here is on just with the way it works. So I don't want to make you, it's like you should do this way. If you feel more comfortable subject by subject, please, go ahead and do that. I'm just sort of pointing out, what my strategy would be. So, and again, this again, I'll put these images into Google Classroom so you can use them. And it's just kind of fleshing out again what we already did with lesson 3. So everybody comfortable there? And we'll just say, which graphic organizer you will use. If you're unsure, indicate that you will use both. I would say don't use both, because that's going to be very time consuming if you're trying to like make an outline of both. And when you get to the day you're taking the test, by that time, if you have a little practice and everything, some of this is sort of intuitive. I don't always break down when I'm writing to this level. So that may be something as well. I, have sort of, some loose sort of, and as a historian, you usually work chronologically. So that kind of dictates how I write anyway. But, again, that's something that's going to be up to you. So we'll just say, for sake of putting in an answer here, I will use point by point. Okay. And I'll go ahead and paste that for sake of this. Okay. And this is actually the last one. Wow, we got done a lot quicker than I thought we were going to today. But it says, study the subject by subject organizer, complete the step listed, type your response in the box, write your completed organizer on your own paper. We already did that. But if you'd want to go back through for practice, thinking about the passages we've read, if you would want to make your own organizers, where you look at different points, that's, fair game. So it says identify the subject in passage 1, the 3 points and 3 pieces of supporting evidence. Is that the last one? Okay. And then for 2, identify the subject in passage 2, the 3 points and the 3 pieces of supporting evidence. So we'll fill this out here as far as looking at Cliff, right, to start with. So for number 7, so it says identify the passage in subject in passage 1, the 3 points, and the 3 pieces of supporting evidence. So the subject is Cliff argues that online learning is not worthwhile. And really, the subject is just Cliff. Cliff's passage. So Cliff's passage about her online learning, her online education, online teaching experience. Okay, and then we can go down here. We can actually build out an outline from that point. So the 3 points and the 3 pieces of supporting evidence. So the first point was claim. So that's going to be our first part of our outline. Claim, point of view. All right, and the reason would be our next step. You know what? Let's, I want to make a mess of this. I'm going to start over and just use the bullet points instead of numbered, because I thought it would go to like a letter instead of that. So Cliff's the point of view. Claim. Okay. And then next in, right, for our outline would be the evidence, which is online teaching is not worthwhile. Okay, and then back up here. No. Do this. Okay. Oh, there we go. Good. All right. So the next point, right, was reasons. So Cliff gives, so say Cliff discusses difficulty communicating with students, right? And then her evidence is did not feel, did not connect with an online community, right? Whatever it may be. And then the final one was tone. So tone, and then Cliff uses a negative tone towards. Okay. That's largely looking at that subject, right? So our subject, right, is Cliff's passage and her overall experience teaching online. That's the subject there. Her point of view was the online teaching is not worthwhile. And then she uses for second point, difficulty communicating with students for reason, right? So did not connect with an online community as evidence. And then tone for our third point that we're going to compare or contrast. Cliff uses a negative tone towards online education. I'll see if this works if I copy and paste it. Okay. Yeah, it looks kind of weird. I don't know if that'll work in. Not so much important, but I just want to, hopefully distinguish, right? So we have the subject of the passage, and then we have the reasons, or sorry, the points, and then the evidence. So it's pretty much right what we're doing here, right? We started with the subject, and then we had a point, and we had evidence. And we're just using sort of more of an outline format to show that. And then same thing we'll do for Jones to show subject by subject. So The subject of the second passage is Jones explaining the benefits. Or Jones, largely it's about students. So Jones explaining the student experience with online education. Okay. Drop down. So the first one was his point of view, Jones's point of view that online learning offers flexibility and that is wrong. Sorry. Jones's point of view that online learning offers many advantages. Okay. His evidence of that is the flexibility and self-management, right? Or sorry. Yeah. So, well, let me see here. So, oh, okay. And yeah, so flexibility, that will work. Jones claims it offers flexibility. Okay. Reasons. So we could say self-management, something like that. Jones discusses self-management. And he provides an example from student. Okay, and then finally tone or reason, right? So reason, okay, and there, then tone, and for tone, Jones uses an optimistic. Okay. Optimistic when discussing the benefits. Okay, there we go. That's in the chat. So, and again, that's taking it subject by subject. It's the same stuff, right? It's the same stuff, whether it's point by point or subject by subject. And it's, we're doing the same thing here, identifying point one. So, yeah, I think they want us to use the Leung Clement text or passage for this because we're using the same thing over and over again, which they didn't offer it so we can have so we could reference it, but same thing, right? We're just using point by point, just more practice. So I don't see a reason why we need to do this again. This is exactly what we did, point by point, right? We gave 3 points. We offered evidence from each passage. It's basically the same thing. Unless you guys want me to go through it, is there anything else you'd want to try in these boxes? Because we could do that. Yay or nay?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the point here, I just want to make sure. Are you guys following? What the idea here of how you're going to frame it?
Yeah.
Okay, because this stuff's weird because I know I try to interact with you guys as much as I can, and just trying to sort of give you ideas. I know I haven't sort of been calling on you guys as much and everything, but I want to just make sure that everybody sort of follows along, and it all sort of is logical to you guys. Okay, so this is all just about, like it says, making that framework. And the more that you, I'll go ahead and submit it because, again, it doesn't matter. That's arbitrary whether we have answers in there or not. Just having a game plan as you're reading. And the more that you see it, right, the more that you write, the more that you read, all of that will help you to, when you sit down, at test time, game plan, right? This is what this is about, is making sure that you just have a game plan, that you don't sit there and freeze when you're like, oh God, I got to write now. All of these lessons are helping you to, tease out the ideas that you're going to need, to have material to write, to know the evidence that you're looking at, the reasons these people are writing the way they are, all of that. And then you got a game plan so you can write something, that's really structured. And that's what's important here, is making sure that it's not, it's structured, it flows logically. That's the type of things that we're looking for. So go ahead and stop here. Stop